The Charities Aid Foundation of America. As the leader in global giving, CAF America offers more than 20 years of experience and expertise to corporations, foundations, and individuals who wish to give internationally and with enhanced due diligence in the United States. Through its industry-leading grant management programs and philanthropic advisory services, CAF America helps donors amplify their impact. This show is dedicated to these donors and the charities they support. CAF America is uniquely positioned to serve as the bridge between these important partners and transforms vision into meaningful action. Guests on the CAF America Radio Network are leaders in their field who share tips for success and stories that inspire. Our host is Ted Hart, the CEO of the Charities Aid Foundation of America. This is a live call-in show. Add your voice by calling 914-338-0855. After the show, you can find all of our podcasts at cafamerica.org. Don't forget to dial 914-338-0855. Now, welcome the host of the CAF America Radio Network, Ted Hart.
And welcome to this latest edition of the CAF America Radio Network. Our topic today is crowdfunding, which is a very important topic that has been growing and is recently a very important phenomenon of online fundraising. It's a rapid evolution of technology and the internet. However, not all crowdfunding is created equal, especially when considering tax-deductible charitable contributions using crowdfunding. Donors and organizers of such campaigns may wrongly assume that donations made through such crowdfunding platforms are always tax-deductible. Going back with a little bit of history here, the earliest examples of crowdfunding online date back to 1997. So as crowdfunding passes its 20th anniversary, we here at CAF America want to give guidance on how to successfully use crowdfunding platforms for charitable giving. And as international giving is the expertise of CAF America, we want to make sure that our listeners understand how they can ensure tax-receipted, regulatory compliant international fundraising via crowdfunding sites is possible. It's estimated that there are over 2,000 crowdfunding sites online, and that by 2025, it's predicted that more than $1 trillion will be raised online using crowdfunding techniques. While such campaigns often use the word contribution or donation or gift in its pitch to the public, the question is, what makes a campaign truly charitable? How does it qualify for tax receipting? And if funds are being moved outside the United States, how do you meet regulatory compliance requirements both in the United States and in the country to which the funds are being sent? My guest today to help us sort through all of these topics and questions is Jessie Krafft, Vice President of Donor Advice and Grant Services at CAF America. Welcome back here on the show, Jessie, here on the CAF America Radio Network.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
So big topic, Jessie, one that has certainly come up many times here at CAF America as we interact with charities around the world who wish to raise money from the United States, but also donors here in the United States who wish to be able to raise money from their family, friends, and colleagues to support charities both in the U.S. and outside of the U.S. So that being the case, let's start off with, first of all, what is crowdfunding and how does it intersect with philanthropic giving? And is there a distinction between these two things? Is crowdfunding always philanthropic giving?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's typically a distinction, but not always. So there can be certainly a merge between the two as well. So there has been a recent surge in fundraising from the public for a variety of different causes, through sites such as GoFundMe and a variety of other platforms that are popping up out there. Some of these sites aim, and the fundraisers aim to raise funds for a person, potentially an individual that has an illness or that needs some sort of support because of, potentially funeral costs or other variety of things that we've seen out there. There are other ways that these crowdfunding sites can actually be used to support, things like like kickstarting campaigns, so for-profit activities, or even charitable activities, so actually supporting charitable projects at a charitable organization. So there's kind of a variety of different buckets that this type of funding could go into for different causes. And so there's certainly a distinction there between, what is actually charitable or an exempt purpose as defined by the IRS, and then what would be considered, more of an investment. So in the case of like those Kickstarter campaigns, or just, a gift to an individual, which may feel charitable, and you could consider it as a piece of your philanthropy, but it wouldn't be tax deductible necessarily. So in most cases, it wouldn't be. So you could consider it in your philanthropy bucket, but you couldn't consider it that way on your tax deductions when you're filing with the IRS. So it's really important, and we'll go through some of this, but it's important to understand when you're giving to these various crowdfunding campaigns what you're actually giving to, and to do your due diligence to make sure it is tax deductible if that is your intent.
And one of the reasons for that is that there are, as we said at the top of the show, more than 2,000 crowdfunding sites online, and not every site necessarily provides advice or counsel or assistance in establishing the campaign as a charitable organization, because in many instances the crowdfunding site itself is a for-profit operation, and therefore is not by itself able to issue a tax receipt or by itself to be able to make the campaign charitable. So as you just mentioned, crowdfunding is it's often informal. It's often family and friends and colleagues coming together, which is the very essence of what crowdfunding is. And it's not necessarily charitable in the eyes of the law or the IRS, but sometimes people want this to be charitable. So why does this not satisfy the IRS definition of charitable giving if people are coming together and the intent is that it go to charitable works?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the IRS has set forth a very specific process for determining determining whether an activity or an organization is charitable and is tax exempt. So, of course, an organization that hopes to receive tax-deductible gifts from their donors would have to apply to the IRS to become a 501c3 public charity. So in the eyes of the IRS, any gifts that are given to individuals or entities or organizations that do not have this tax-exempt status that has been granted by the IRS would not be considered tax deductible for their purposes. So it's really kind of a black and white in that sense of whether the organization that you're giving to has that tax exempt status and has approved this fundraiser. I think that's an important point we should talk about as well, because there are certainly crowdfunding sites out there that potentially are fundraising for an organization unbeknownst to them, and so that it actually might not be tax deductible. So you have to even kind of understand a little bit more deeply how the money is getting to the organization. But really, it is a black and white between, are they a tax exempt entity that is recognized by IRS or not? And that's really the way to determine the first piece of it.
So if someone is interested in supporting a charitable cause, I think what you're saying is they need to be certain that it is the charity that is establishing the relationship with the crowdfunding site, because it matters where the money goes. Because if, for instance, I'm an individual and I go to my favorite crowdfunding site and I set up the campaign, that I am sort of the owner of that campaign and therefore the recipient of that money, even if I intend to then take that money and send it to a charity, I'm not able to issue a tax receipt, even though I might use the phrase "make a donation," "make a charitable gift," "make a donation" to that charity. I'm actually receiving that money, which may or may not be taxable to me, even if I then turn around and write a check to that charity. So I'm being very honest about it. The issue is that each and every donor to that campaign would not, in that instance, qualify for a tax receipt, but the person who collected the money and then wrote the check to the charity, they could then be receipted.
Yes, that's exactly right. And unfortunately, we do run into this as as CAF America, as a charity. We have this happen every once in a while where a donor comes to us and, of course, has the best intentions and says, we ran this great GoFundMe campaign, we raised all of this money, and now I need you to provide tax receipts to all of these individuals, and I'm sending you this one check from my personal account that aggregates everything that I collected. And unfortunately, in that case, because we, in all of these situations, we're not aware of it in the beginning, so we can't make sure that this is actually, that the money is coming directly to us, that it is tax deductible and everything like that. In those cases, we're not actually able to provide tax receipts. Even though we are a 501c3 and this money is coming to us, we can't provide tax receipts to all of those individual donors that might have given to that campaign, because in actuality, what's happening is that whatever crowd fundraising site they used is sending a check to that individual, and that individual is sending the money to us. So for our legal purposes, that individual is the only donor on that campaign.
That's right.
And as you mentioned, then there are, of course, things that like income tax considerations that individual might even need to consider on their own.
That's right. So again, just to summarize for our listeners, you've got 100 donors who gave, and now you've received that money from the crowdfund site. It's not possible to receipt each and every one of those donors because, in fact, legally, they made the contribution to you personally, and then you, hopefully being an honest person, then wrote the check to the charity. Therefore, you are, in fact, the only donor of those funds.
That's right. Yeah. And like I said, it's barely ever the case that we've run into, at least, where this individual has bad intentions or knows this is going into it. It's really just the lack of education, which is why we're talking about this today. And
providing this information. And I did fail to mention, I'm sorry, at the top of the show that we are also live casting over at Facebook, at facebook.com/CAF America. And of course, the video will be posted on that same site after this show. Jessie, we're going to take a very quick break. When we come back, I want to break this down and make sure that we give our listeners today a step-by-step way that they could use their favorite crowdfunding site and receipt each one of their donors and move the ultimate contribution to their favorite domestic or international charity. And we'll be right back after this break.
Remember, our podcasts and archives are always available 24 hours a day at cafamerica.org. If you're listening today, our phone lines are open. Call in and ask a question by dialing 914-338-0855. Now, back to the CAF America Radio Network and our host, Ted Hart.
And we're back here live on the CAF America Radio Network, and our guest today is Jessie Krafft, Vice President of Donor Advised and Grant Services at CAF America. And our topic today is crowdfunding, a very popular way to bring small donors, many donors together to fund a particular project. We're focused today on charitable giving. And Jessie, before the break, we wanted to make sure that we share sort of a step-by-step process for our listeners today, whether they be a charity looking to fundraise or an individual who's looking to fundraise. How can they utilize the services of their favorite crowdfunding site and be able to tax receipt each donor and be able to make that donation to their favorite charity? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a really important question. So there are a couple things here. So if you're an individual, and let's say, there are a lot of cases where an individual is fundraising for a run or a bike ride or things like that they're participating in, and they're trying to fundraise from all of their friends. It's really important, if you're doing something like that, that you coordinate with the people that are actually running that event, or even if you're just fundraising for a particular project at an organization, you need to coordinate with the charity themselves that you're hoping to receive the funds, to make sure that whatever site you use, perhaps they already have a site set up for you that you should be using, or that if they're allowing you, and they might not, but if they're allowing you to find your own fundraising site, that they can coordinate directly with those that manage that crowdfunding site, to make sure that, one, the money is coming directly to the charity, because as we discussed before the break, that money can't go to that individual to be sent then to the charity. The money has to be sent directly to that charity for it to be considered tax deductible. And that that the language that you're using on the page is consistent with what the charity would accept on their own fundraising pages. And perhaps, including things like their EIN and items like that to ensure that there's transparency and that the donors understand where their money is going. Additionally, a lot of times the charity will work with that crowdfunding site to provide a way for an automated tax receipt to go through so that the donor is receiving that acknowledgement, and we have to make sure that all of those, and those are just a few of the steps, but those pieces are followed in order for it to be considered tax deductible. So really the most important point is don't do this on your own. You have to collaborate with that charitable entity themselves in order to make sure this is done correctly.
Right. Unless, again, you are intending yourself to be the recipient of those funds, in which case we believe that you should be upfront. Right. You should be upfront with those who are contributing to let them know that they are contributing to funds that you will be donating to the charity. So what if you're a donor who's invited to participate in a crowdfunding campaign, of which millions of people participate, and they come to the campaign site and tug at the heartstrings, or certainly a compelling mission that they want to support? How would I know as a donor that this has been set up appropriately? What should I look for if in fact I'm making a donation, contribution, or gift, and I'm expecting that because it's going to charity, I'm also going to receive or be eligible for a tax receipt? How do I know that I'm participating in a campaign that has been appropriately set up?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think it depends on the site. There are some crowdfunding sites that have now kind of caught on to the fact that donors are having trouble making this distinction, and so there are some crowdfunding sites that have certified charitable pages where there's some sort of badge or check mark or a different URL that is kind of separating those into a different category if they can guarantee that a tax receipt will come from it and that it is a tax deductible donation. So in some sites it's quite obvious. I would say it should be obvious to the donors of whether that's the case, but in others they might not have that type of functionality, and so you really need to read the fine print, see if there is an EIN present. It's very easy to go search that EIN on the charity.
Now, Jessie, what is it?
Website.
Just for our listeners, just make sure they know. What is an EIN?
Yeah. Yes. It's an employer identification number, and this is a number that's used by the IRS. It's essentially your tax registration ID as an organization, and so the EIN that's given to 501c3s which are charitable organizations that would be tax deductible, can be verified on the IRS website. So I, as a donor, I know that if I'm giving to a 501c3, I always pull that EIN and make sure I'm doing my due diligence to make sure that is actually a tax-exempt entity before I give to them. So that would be a piece of it, but of course, anyone could put an EIN anywhere. So, I think you need to go a bit further than that. Potentially even talking to if it's not clear in the language on the page, you might want to talk to the organizer of the campaign to see who the funds are actually going to, and just making some inquiries based on that if you're not seeing the information that clearly distinguishes it as a tax-exempt organization and as a tax-deductible gift on the site.
And in asking that question, you may actually be prompting the person who has goodwill and good intentions to think through some things that maybe they were unaware of, it may not have been set up for you to get a tax receipt, and that may not have been intentional on the part of the person that you're asking the question. So being an informed donor oftentimes can be helpful to you, but also to the solicitor or the person who is trying to do a good thing and support charitable activities.
Right, because it might help them realize that they need to go a bit further to make sure that their donors are receiving their proper tax benefits from their generous gift.
Now, all of this advice that we've given so far is proposed to every single crowdfunding site, every single donor who may want to make sure that first of all, the money is going directly to a charity, that it is potentially tax receivable, but specifically to the expertise of CAF America being the premier international intermediary in the United States. What if now what I want to do is the charity that I want to support is outside of the United States, or I'm a charity outside of the United States trying to crowdfund in the United States? What are the steps that need to be taken into account if, for instance, I wanted to have CAF America be the intermediary that is going to help me do that? What does that look like, and how do I make that happen?
Yeah, good question. So if you're an individual that wants to give to a foreign charity through one of these sites, you're of course not going to be looking to see if they're registered on the IRS database, because of course in most cases they will not be. There's a small subset of actual foreign-based organizations, so we're not talking about friends of organizations or things like that, but foreign-based organizations that have 501c3 status, but it's a very small subset. So in this case, you should really make that assumption that if it is based in a foreign country, that it is not automatically tax deductible, and that you're not looking to the IRS site to verify that. But instead, there are, of course, like CAF America, intermediary organizations that can act as the 501c3 that is working in cooperation with that foreign organization to send them tax deductible gifts. So in that case, essentially, the donors are still giving. If the foreign charity has developed a relationship with a 501c3 organization or intermediary that is assisting them in the U.S., essentially that the donors to that organization would be actually legally giving to the U.S. 501c3, and then that 501c3, such as CAF America, would undertake all of the proper IRS regulatory compliance checks to ensure that we can give those funds to that organization in a tax-exempt way. And there's, of course, a whole process around that. But for the donors that want to give to foreign organizations, you should make sure that they have, if you want it to be tax deductible, make sure that there is a 501c3 partnership in place. Otherwise, it will not be tax deductible to you. And then on the other side, if you are a foreign charity that does not have 501c3 status and you wish to fundraise in the United States, you will need to seek out a partnership with a 501c3, or some opt to actually register as a 501c3 themselves, but that requires a lot more effort and financial input. And what you would be doing in that case is very similar to an individual donor who wants to do a crowdfunding project on one of these sites. You would need to work directly with that 501c3 partner. So the foreign charity needs to work closely with the 501c3 to make sure that, again, all of that language on the site is clear, that the money is going directly to the 501c3 and not to the foreign charity, and that the tax receipts we're able to tax receipt through the site, and other factors like that before you start that funding campaign. So like I said, we've had individuals come to us that have done these campaigns without our knowledge. We've also had charities that come to us after the fact and say, oh, well, we raised all of this money and we have it. Can you send the tax receipts, right? But of course, the money never came to us, and we weren't aware of this fundraiser going on, and so we're not able then to tax receipt, and so they're in a position where they're having to tell their donors that it actually wasn't tax deductible, which is not a good position to be in. So on both sides, it definitely requires close coordination with the charity that you're hoping will tax receipt for that donation.
So there's a very specific process that has to be followed, but bottom line is crowdfunding is possible. It's possible to give directly to charities, to be tax receipted for charities. It's also possible to support domestic charities or international charities, but there's a step-by-step process that needs to be followed, and sort of buyer beware. don't assume that every time you see the word donation, charitable, gift, that you actually are making a contribution to a charity or that you'll be eligible for a tax receipt.
That's right. That's right. And I don't want us to come off as, us advocating not to give to projects and campaigns that are going to individuals with illnesses or things like that. Of course, there is certainly philanthropic value in giving to those types of causes, so long as you're sure that it's actually a legitimate cause. There's certainly a lot of
there's need for vetting there as well. Right.
There's a need for vetting too. Yeah, but so I don't want to say that no one should be giving to those individuals. Of course, it's just vetting is necessary, and just you go into it knowing that it is not tax deductible if that money is going directly to an individual or a family in need.
That's right. That's right. So there's lots of different ways to be charitable, but there really is only one path through which that is going to be considered a tax receipted regulatory compliant contribution to a charitable entity, as opposed to supporting somebody in need directly. And in both instances, you want to make sure that you're vetting that there is actually a charity or that there is actually a person in need. And then you have the regulatory compliance issue that comes into play if you're moving the money internationally.
That's right.
Yeah. So it need not be more complex than any of that. Maybe that sounds somewhat complex, but the reality is that, as you said, we want all of our listeners to understand that crowdfunding sites are very helpful, can be very helpful, and can be used. Here at CAF America, we encourage those who want to utilize our expertise to choose the site that they prefer, to have a relationship with that site. But before they launch the campaign, if they wish their donors to receive a tax receipt, if they want to have regulatory compliance and moving the money to an international charity, to do all the planning before you launch the campaign, and therefore our expertise can help you meet all of that criteria.
Yes, that's right. We certainly have many successful crowdfunding campaigns going on at any given time with a variety of different sites. As Ted mentioned, we don't discriminate against any of them. We're very open to working with any of the crowdfunding sites that will work with us. So we really like to leave that preference up to the donor or the charity that's running that fundraiser, because there are certainly a lot of great options out there for different services and different functionalities on these sites. So we leave it open to choice, but you have to coordinate with us to make sure that we can manage it in a tax efficient way.
Exactly, and they come in all shapes and sizes and fee levels or price points, and none of those fees have anything to do with CAF America, and so we encourage people to make a decision that fits their campaign, fits their desires with the functionality that they're looking for. But ultimately, CAF America is here to make sure that the risk is managed, the regulations are followed, and that reputations are protected. And that is our pledge here at CAF America. Jessie, thank you so much for being my guest here on this show. I think a very important topic, and certainly as we started the show today, a timely topic, because there are so many crowdfunding sites, and in fact, it is expected to continue to grow and raise a great deal of money. And our hope is that some of that money will go to charities and charitable causes in a tax-receipted, regulatory compliant way. Thank you again for being my guest here on the CAF America Radio Network.
You've been listening to the CAF America Radio Network. Tell all your friends and colleagues to check out our production schedule. Sign up for our free newsletter and download
60 seconds
iPod-friendly podcasts at cafamerica.org. Thanks for listening to the CAF America Radio Network.